Information Security. I lead our penetration testing practice, incident response, digital forensics, litigation support, pretty much all the cool stuff we do. I get to lead the majority of that. So with that, Sheffer reached out and said, hey, why don't you give your ransomware talk? And, I've been working on this talk. I've been updating it for probably 6 years now because it just continues to evolve. And if you see me looking to the left, I have a window. That's where I'm looking when I'm thinking. So, ransomware, I've been leading incident response practices for probably 14 years now, 12, 14 years. So I've watched the evolution of ransomware as to where it was and where it is now. And right now it is as nasty as it can possibly be. So without further ado, we'll kind of cover the history of ransomware. A lot of this is not going to be a surprise, but it's really interesting to see where it started and where it is now. And then we'll also talk about the current state, which is, we're not talking about one Bitcoin anymore. We're talking about, we have current clients that before they were our client, they were paying ransoms of up to $12 to $14 million. And so this one's actually hitting really close to me now because I'm in Knoxville. And so our team is split. We've got 12 pen testers and IR guys. We're split between Knoxville and Nashville. The city of Knoxville was hit. So this is near and dear to me for a lot. They are not a client. They will be soon for what it's worth. So dealing with ransomware, we'll talk about that. Some protections that kind of walk through how to protect the different types and the different stages of ransomware. And then again, guys, at any point in time, stop, challenge me. If you have any questions, feel free to do that. As I mentioned, so a little bit more background on me. I don't know if anyone's familiar with IANS, which is the Institute of Applied Network Security. It's kind of a mini think tank. Think Gartner, but just specific to information security. I'm on the faculty there, so I have a lot of access to a lot of research data. That's where some of this is going to be coming from. But this is from Wombat. 1,000 U.S. employees, they know what ransomware is. Everyone knows what it is. And so I'll get on different soapboxes because it's a smaller group, and I hope you can appreciate that. But I can say this now, but I think ransomware was one of the best things to ever happen to IT operations and IT security teams. If you've went through it, I know you're thinking, man, you're an idiot. Think about it. The board members were saying, we will write you a blank check to be sure that we don't get hit with ransomware. From an operations perspective, most companies didn't know whether or not their backups worked. Unfortunately, they found out that they weren't working. So companies invested so much money in IT security and IT operations when ransomware started in phase 2 or ransomware 2.0, I'll talk about. It's probably about 2014. I think that's really helped things, but it's also been extremely painful to get there. So most employees know. My wife teaches group fitness classes, and she has people in her class that come to her and say, your husband works in information security. My company was hit with ransomware. What should we do? It's amazing how much. So let's start, going back. This is like early 2000s, what I call ransomware 1.0. So I'm going to take my consultant hat off and put on my CEO hat. If I am running a company that's responsible for developing ransomware, here's what I'm thinking. All right, ransomware 1.0, it was way too much work. From a business perspective, and ransomware is nothing more than a business. They're doing this to make money. It was a really high cost per conversion for a prospect to make them a client. The customer retention was terrible because we had a crappy product. And there's just extremely low return on investment. It relied on a lot of pressure and dishonest sales tactics. And there was just no urgency for this actual product. So again, this was early 2000s. And here's an example. Your computer was blocked. All activity on this computer has been recorded. Essentially what they're saying here is you've been surfing porn, and you know what? You're going to have to pay us. Otherwise, we're going to tell people. So downloading of copyright material or whatever, we've made up something. We can all agree that this is a bunch of crap. It didn't work. Some people paid, but most people didn't. And as we evolved a little bit more, you can see it and it became a little more authoritative. So, all right, now your computer's been locked by the FBI. Still, we had a low customer retention. The sales pitch was a bit of a stretch. We were lying. Payment was too difficult. And so I want to pause here for a minute because I strongly believe that Bitcoin was created or was heavily influenced because of ransomware. Because my Aunt Shirley cannot go down and does not know how to go to CVS and buy a money pack or buy this method of payment because it has to be, reserved as possible to where no one knows who it is. So if you read this, your operating system, your system's been locked, federal United States of America, exclamation point, made up some law. Your IP address was, visiting pornography. To unlock your computer, pay $200. Side note, if you're in trouble with the FBI, $200 is not going to get you out of that problem. But, you have 72 hours to pay. Otherwise, we're going to come and arrest you. You can pay it through MoneyPack. And so this is where the challenge really started. I think we could see, if I'm running a ransomware, company, I can see a real possibility here. People may pay this. We may be able to do this. We're getting a little bit of uptick. We're getting a little bit of revenue, but man, I had to pull my guys off of Home Depot, with this, credit card scraping malware to develop this, and I need to get this return. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Let's revamp it. So this is probably 2012. First off, if I'm CEO of this ransomware organization, it has to be state of the art. I need to be sure that it is the best product on the market. We must solve real problems. Now, we're going to create this problem, but we're going to solve it for you also. It's kind of like the vacuum salesperson that walks in and throws dirt on the floor and then vacuums it up. We have to have a high return on investment. We really need a short sales cycle, and there has to be some urgency. I really want high customer retention. I want the same people coming back over and over and over because we have such a superior product. We have to standardize this payment method. If you think about it, that's when Bitcoin kind of came along, was about 2012, 13, 14. I want us to have the best quality customer service we can have. I want 5 stars on Yelp or Google or whatever. We are going to have the best customer service ever. We're also going to give out product samples. People don't trust us. We're kind of hackers. We're causing a problem, but they don't trust us. Let's prove to them that we're going to solve the problem. And it has to be regional focus. And the reason I say this is because in Russia, you are allowed to hack anyone you want as long as you don't hack people in Russia. Same thing in China. I mean, it's pride to hack other companies and other organizations. Just don't do it on your home soil. You know what? Just to kick in here, I want us to be the most predominant malware on the internet. So if I'm setting the vision for a company, this is kind of what it would have looked like. And so we get to ransomware 2.0. This is 2013. This is CryptoLocker. Most of us have seen this, unfortunately, one way or another. But let's look at this. So, we've encrypted all of your files, your personal files, because we're smart enough not to encrypt the operating system files. Otherwise, you can't pay it. So photos, videos, documents. Here's a complete list of all the files that we've encrypted on your device. So we're also the encryption was produced, using RSA 2048. That's pretty high-end encryption. And the private key is unique to you. A single copy of this private key we have, if you want it, you're going to pay us $100 United States. That would be awesome nowadays. That's not the case anymore, but this is kind of how it started. Any attempt to remove or damage the software would lead to the immediate destruction of the private key by the server. So I get that. We've created urgency, and we looked at ransomware 1.0 and the FBI message. Some dude at, Geek Squad at Best Buy could probably remove that. My 14-year-old could probably fix that. This is real. And so also, your private key is going to be destroyed in 54 hours or something like that. So when I was with a previous company, so I've been with LBMC 4 years, I was with a previous company, and we worked a lot of these. And so we would dissect the malware, we, reverse engineer the binaries and, look at what's going on. And this was always interesting. They got a help file. Hey, you've been encrypted by a crypto wall. What does this mean? How does this happen? Hey, if you want your key, click on one of these links. We'll teach you to use Bitcoin. In fact, you know what? If you're going to use Bitcoin, you're going to have to get on Tor. Here's the browser. Here's a help file to make it as easy as possible to pay our fee. It always cracked me up because when you would follow these links and you would go there, they actually have a CAPTCHA on their screen for payment. I guess, honor among thieves, but there was a CAPTCHA there just to be sure that you're real. So to decrypt the files, you're going to pay $700. You have this time frame. Here's your operating system. Here's your IP address. Payment method, frequently asked questions, decrypt one file for free. So here at Ransomware CEO, I'm like, all right, I'll prove to you that we'll decrypt your file. Just give us one. We'll decrypt it and send it back just to prove it. And also here's support. They have currently still a very sophisticated support network because they want to get paid. That's the only reason that they're doing this, is to be paid, the real ransomware guys. Here's a little bit more about CryptoWall and Bitcoin. If you're new to Bitcoin, we're going to teach you how to do this. Actually, if you look at number 3 there, we're going to go ahead and do the conversion to tell you how many Bitcoins you need to purchase. Of course, 3 Bitcoins for $700. That was the good old days. If you want to pay, this is all you have to do. We'll give you your key. So when we talk about being the most predominant malware on the market, and this is from 2016, but this is ransomware 2.0. If you'll look, you can see the different families that were here. So Locky was a big one. Tesla Crypt was huge. CryptoWall. In June of 2014, CryptoWall made $27 million. So if we want to talk about a return on investment, I think we're successful there. Again, this is just talking about, sites came up just to talk about ransomware because it was so bad. Lots of new variances on the market, those types of things. There's a lot of competition in the ransomware market in 2015, 2016. Here's the regional focus that I was talking about. So when you reverse engineer the code, if you look at that highlighted block area, you can see these country codes. All of those are in Russia. What this is saying, or the Eastern Europe, sorry to be politically correct. What this is saying is, if we geotag that the IP address that this malware lands on, if it's one of these countries, we are not going to encrypt the files. We're just going to dissolve and go away. So, which is really interesting because they built it into the code to be sure that they weren't, ransomware in their own countrymen. So according to the report, obviously Europe and the United States are the main targets. Ransomware actually overtook the banking Trojans during that time period. So they took all of the resources from the banking Trojans, whichever ones were most popular, and they concentrated on ransomware. And if you think about it, there's not a lot of banking Trojans left.
I'm glad.
Well, yes, we went through quite a few of those, but I saw that transition to say, all right, they've went from these banking Trojans, now it's ransomware. And so there's still a couple of them left. They're continuing to be modified, but they took their efforts and put it toward ransomware because the return on investment was so much better. And as you can see here, ransomware infections nearly 3 times that of banking Trojans. So we want to be the biggest, animal on the, on the internet when it comes to ransomware. So in 2016, ransomware was the #1 malware variant on the internet. Barely, but we checked that mark. So if we go back and look at ransomware 1.0, which was a joke, we went to 2, we started making some money. Let's do a project status. If we have a board meeting, we're all in, I don't know, Aruba or somewhere like that. State of the art, 2048-bit encryption. It's pretty state of the art. It doesn't get any better than that at that time. Solve real problems? Yes. We create the problem, but we solve it for a fee. Return on investment? Really high return on investment if you think about it. So like I said, CryptoWall, $27 million in June of 2014, I think. Short sales cycle. We created that urgency. You have 72 hours or we're going to destroy your key. Truth is, I don't think that they would ever really destroy the key, but it created that urgency. High customer retention. During that time, I had a couple of clients that over and over and over, they were hit with ransomware and they just kept paying it. Standard payment method. The whole Bitcoin, evolution solved that problem. Quality customer service. On Google, we've got 4.5 stars because we're going to get the client their product that they paid for because we want them to come back if it happens again. Product samples. You send us a file, we'll decrypt it to prove it. Regional focus. Most predominant malware on the market. Ransomware 2.0 met every one of these objectives. So just to review kind of where ransomware 2.0 was, and we're going to talk about where we are now, is the first thing it would do, it was very specific to the machine. So file servers were impacted, but they were not infected for the most part. So we'll talk about how it was getting on the machines. First thing it would do was delete volume shadow copies. So if I'm a developer, I'm like, I know for Windows, Vista, all the way up, there's volume shadow copies there. And if I encrypt one of those devices, the user just has to reboot and restore from the volume shadow copy. First thing it did, you can watch the command, it just deletes it. It encrypted the local user files, and then it would go alphabetically through the drive shares. That's where things got really spicy because now it started hitting network shares, home drives, shared drives. It would also encrypt any attached removable media. which is when people finally figured out that having the server being backed up by a big USB drive that's connected all the time is not really a good idea, because it would encrypt that USB drive and now the backup is gone. It could impact cloud storage. And what I mean by that is OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever that is, we all have clients on our devices that take a specific folder or whatever we decide, and it syncs it with the cloud service. Well, if that folder gets encrypted with ransomware, the encrypted files would sync up to cloud storage. Since then, Dropbox, Box, now they have versioning, and that's a lot of the reason why. Well, there's a lot of other benefits, because you could sync up, some ransom files to, cloud storage. Now you can go and say, no, I want the version from yesterday. So the recovery options with 2.0 was restore from backups. That's still a viable option. That's where a lot of people realize that, air-gapped backups are a really good idea. We need to be sure our backups are working. It didn't always work well, because, if you think about the cost benefit, we can pay $700 to get the decryption key, or we can spend 2 days to restore a 2 terabyte file server. You know what? Maybe it's a good idea to pay the ransom. Or you could find copies of files elsewhere, which is never a good idea. Again, paying the ransom was a viable option then. It is a viable option now. I'm not encouraging it, and we can have that discussion in a little bit, but that's always an option. And pray for mercy. Mercy meaning one of the projects, I think it was Tesla Crypt. On the bottom there, actually it's at the top. So we can wait and see, what are some of these really smart security researchers, can they come up with a decryption key? Yeah, they will. Over time, they will, but do you want to wait 9 months for that? No. Tesla Crypt, I think these dudes just woke up on a Saturday morning and felt really guilty about what they did and said, folks, we're sorry. Here's the master decryption key for everything. I wouldn't depend on that either, but that was kind of funny. They just said, we're done. We made the money. Here's the master decryption key. How about it? And there were a lot of companies that really went out of business, especially small and solo law firms. I do a lot with law firms from a litigation support and a digital forensics perspective, and they didn't have copies of files. And you can't call your client and say, oh man, you know what? It's been a rough week. We got hit with ransomware and I lost all of your files. Can you provide those files back to me? You're going to lose your client. So there were a lot of companies that went out of business, even as recent as a year ago. We'll talk about some clients that are some customers that went out of business. There were 2 major attack vectors when it came to ransomware 2.0. The first was the drive-by download. So this is one that we'd worked in 2015. I leave it here because it tells a story. When we see the stat that 100 of the top websites, are infected with malware, the websites aren't infected. They're compromised, and there's code that will cause you to go off to a different website. So this was actually from a ransomware perspective, our goal was to figure out how we got on the machine, what was impacted, and was data stolen. So when we do the analysis and the timeline analysis, we can see here they went to this auto sales place and they're looking for a call, for some sort of car or something. WordPress was gold for the ransomware authors. You can see in the second line, WP-content, there's a WordPress plugin here. The plugins are what normally gets people in trouble. The next line, you can see it's shipped them off to another website to download and install the ransomware. That's how the drive-by downloads would work. And so that is, the first way that it would get on devices. The second one was just old-fashioned phishing emails. For some reason, this isn't a true email. Again, I was at a different company at the time, but 4 of my clients in East Tennessee received this same email from Courtney. Nobody knew who Courtney was, but she's got an invoice, and I need you to go ahead and open that. It's an RTF document. This is like, 1997. No one does RTFs anymore, but when you open the document, it would ask you to enable active content. Never, ever, ever enable active content, because either us as, hired hackers or real hackers are going to use that to download code to the machine. So what would happen is you would open that document, and when you enable active content, it pretty much tells the computer, whatever you want to do, go do it. It would run a script and go and download ransomware. So the response, or the best way to respond to ransomware 2.0 at that time was, first, you've got to act extremely quickly, because normally, we would respond to these and the client would have 20,000 devices. It's only 1 or 2 that actually have the ransomware on the device. So, you had to, respond really quickly, take it off the network, determine who the culprits were, because what everyone would know is, hey, our file shares are being encrypted. but they didn't take the time to figure out what was causing it. The best way was always to go and look at the last modified parameter of a file and see who last modified the file. If you see a pattern there, it was probably that user. Track the user back to a device, translate the GUID to Active Directory and figure that out, remove it from the network, recover. This is where it was always important, was to determine how did it get in, because if you don't determine how it got in, you're probably going to get hit again. If it was an exploited vulnerability, I mentioned Word, but Adobe was really big at that time. Adobe Reader had so many flaws in it. They were exploiting that as much as they possibly could. And then just implement the needed controls. And we'll talk about some very simple controls, not just for ransomware, but any type of malware that'll kind of keep it out of your systems. Determine any legal obligation. So with Ransomware 2.0, it was always the question, and we do a lot in healthcare, it was always a question of, do we have to disclose, was data accessed or exfiltrated? During this Ransomware 2.0 era, we only saw 2 variances of ransomware that would actually exfiltrate data. And so we could look real quickly and see, the attorneys would always ask, did it take data? We would reverse engineer the binary and say, nope, there's no capability here, or there was. And then it was, did they actually take anything? And at that point, that's when we would determine any legal obligations, excuse me, any legal obligations for disclosure. Very few disclosures were occurring during this time period based on ransomware. Now there's this whole Ransomware 2.5, which is unapproved. So if I'm the CEO of ransomware company and I look at this product, I'm really pissed because this is not part of our business objective. So the first one, not PETYA, however we want to describe it, it was exploiting the Eternal Blue exploit from the NSA. Thank you, NSA, for having someone disclose that. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek. We actually still leverage Eternal Blue for the most part, and we have people from the NSA, so it helps. The only purpose for PETYA or not PETYA was destruction. That was it. There was no monetary objective whatsoever. So, a couple of companies, Maersk or however you pronounce that, $300 million. FedEx, $300 million. I mean, that was a big deal, and people you could not pay the ransom. They didn't make any money from it. And then we went to WANNACRY. And so one of the issues with Ransomware 2.0 was it was localized to the machine. When we get to this 2.5 era, it was wormable. And that was a nightmare for everybody. So I've been in InfoSec long enough to remember, SQL Slammer that just killed the internet. And it was wormable. This is what was happening with 2.5. So on 2017, it was the perfect storm. WANNACRY was very successful, used SMB vulnerability to spread. It went from machine to machine to machine. The vulnerability was patched by Microsoft for supported versions of Windows, meaning XP was not part of that. And a lot of companies at that time actually still had Windows XP. Eternal Blue was part of the NSA toolset. And we knew that new things were coming after what happened with WANNACRY. So here was the note. And, if you've looked at ransomware, especially Ransomware 2.0, they've just plagiarized this. I think this is what Tesla Crypt looked like, or one of the major variances. They didn't do anything original here. Here's what was happening. Hey, you've been encrypted. This is what's going on. So here's the good of what happened with WANNACRY. They had more than 230,000 victims, more than 150 countries. It spread worldwide like SQL Slammer did. It had multiple payloads. So we also, we had the Eternal Blue. It also had backdoors with double pulsar. So that's why anytime you're impacted by ransomware, the suggestion is always to change all your passwords, because not only did it encrypt the device, it also would save cache credentials and take those and use them at a later time if they want to, log in, via VPN or something like that. Here's where it really got complicated. It actually resets the permissions on files. So not only did it encrypt them, it reset the permissions. So even if you did decrypt the files, all of your NTFS permissions and your share permissions are going to be mucked up. And so that's what really caused a lot of issues. The bad part about WANNACRY was they only made $80,000 in revenue. You have something this destructive and this powerful, and you only make $80,000 in revenue. The payment system was not ready, meaning no one could even pay the ransom when they wanted to. It was very difficult to do. That variant was very premature. It was not ready for production because it didn't always destroy volume shadow copies. There were decryptors that were available in days. It only worked on Windows 7 devices, and Windows 10 was almost out at that point, and it was just interesting that it only focused on Windows 7. It had a kill switch in which the command and control was built into the binary that was getting its instructions from, and this researcher, or this geek, figured out, hey, they're all reaching out to the same, DNS name. Let's just kill that. And when that happened, it dissolved and it just died. He was later arrested for hacking somebody else, but I guess that's a different story. Antivirus vendors were already blocking it, which means, the whole success factor in ransomware is you have to get by the EDR platforms or the advanced malware or whatever that is. Symantec was even blocking it. I'm not throwing shade on Symantec, but if Symantec's already blocking something, it's probably not going to be very effective. And then someone broke the rule. They broke the rule because ransomware is to generate revenue, not havoc. So this is the infection map, which I found to be interesting. If you'll notice, there are certain areas that aren't being touched and certain areas that were being hit pretty hard. Then Petya came out. This was also 2017, plausible deniability, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It was very targeted. So we know that Russia does not always get along with all the other countries around them. And so, Petya was a WannaCry copycat. It took advantage of the same SMB vulnerability, which was Eternal Blue, to spread inside networks, but also externally. It also dumped the credentials as it spread. Same thing as I was saying earlier. It would, infect a device. It would, use hacking tools to actually dump down local admin credentials and anything else that was saved. There was no valid decryption key for this. So Russia was targeting a specific country that they don't like. They've already turned off their electricity a couple times. I'm going to choose not to name the country, but you can probably figure it out. That country had a very specific accounting software package that everyone there used. So what Russia did, which was actually pretty ingenious, they were able to get into the supply chain. Every day, the accounting firms or the companies would get an update for that software. Russia put Petya into that. They were part of the supply chain. They put ransomware into the daily update for the accounting software. And when it ended up in that country, they didn't realize the spread. And it spread to everyone very quickly. The only purpose for this was to create havoc. This was the actual note. You couldn't even pay that if you wanted to. They had no intention whatsoever to make any money off of this. They just wanted to take systems down. Huge oil companies, not this one, but so like Saudi Aramco, which I think is one of the largest oil companies in the world, they were hit with something similar. So it was very focused. They just didn't realize what reach or how interconnected all the systems are, all the way to United States and Canada. So the good things about Petya was that initial infection was pretty creative. That took a lot of work to do. The hidden agenda is they just wanted to shut down that country. They used the stolen credentials, as they would spread. So after the cleanup, then they could take those credentials and log back into the networks. And then it was delayed notification. And this one is key. So with ransomware 1.0 and 2.0, when your files were encrypted, you received a message pretty quickly. In fact, on the file shares, there was a text file. Hey, here's what you have to do. This one was delayed. It waited until all of the devices were infected before it activated. And so that is what we're seeing with ransomware 3.0 that we'll talk about in a minute. Again, the bad, no method of payment. There was no reason to do this other than to create havoc. A lot of unintended victims, there were hospitals, and there were a lot of companies in the United States that were, deeply impacted by that. Sorry, I dropped something, I was picking it up. The espionage was obvious, and everyone pretty much figured out who it was against. Their business model just stunk. They didn't make any money. And if I'm ransomware CEO, this product line was not on the roadmap. We have some rogue people here. So now if we go from 1.0 to 2.0, and what are we going to do with 3, which is where we are, wormable, we've already finished that. Here's what's key. So I'm going to put my CEO hat back on again. I want to decrease the client base. I'm serious. I want less clients. I want more valuable clients that will pay more. increase the revenue per client, we can focus much more on high value clients than everyone else. We've got to create footholds and be patient. I remember the whole China APT, an advanced persistent threat, which was an acronym that used to make me throw up in the back of my throat, but we need to act like what they would do. So when China would break it, and I used to work a lot in the cleared contractor realm, from an incident perspective, China would spend months, weeks, days on a network to figure out what is there, how do they get it, and how do we get it out of here? We need to emulate that. Let's create that foothold. Let's have multiple ways in and out, and let's figure out what they have, and let's be patient. Because if we're going to focus on lesser clients, we need to be sure that they're worth it. Let's do the work. Let's get into the financials. If we're on the network and we can escalate to the main administrator, let's find the spreadsheets. Let's find the CFO's machine. Let's find the CFO's shares. How much money do they have? What are they willing to pay? Let's do the market research for our clients. We're going to pressure that purchase decision because we're going to lock every one of their machines. And if they don't pay, then they don't do business. We also have to add another element here. So sometimes we may have a client that is pretty sophisticated. They've got real-time replicated backups, everything that we fear. Before we encrypt everything, let's exfiltrate it. Now we've got a second level. Let's hold them ransom and say, all right, well, fine. You restored your files, but we're going to publish your data if you don't pay us. We've got to be able to circumvent new protections. So Cylance is out, and Sentinel is out, and CrowdStrike, and all these. We have to do the market research to be sure that we can circumvent those controls. Otherwise, our product doesn't work. And we're going to steal all credentials everywhere we can get them. If we're going to be on the network for months, we're going to get domain admin credentials, service account credentials, every credential that we can, because when it's done, we're coming back. And we've got to be flexible, folks. We can negotiate with these people. We're going to spend a lot of time to know this company inside and out before we do business together. If they're not willing to pay $14 million, we'll negotiate down to 11. We've spent the time. Let's get the money. So this is kind of where we are today. The ransomware that we've seen since March of last year, that's what I call 3.0. It hits hospitals, IT providers, municipalities that we're going to talk about, manufacturers, financial institutions. They even hit libraries. So I don't know why they're hitting libraries. I don't know about in the middle Tennessee area, but in Knoxville, libraries don't have a lot of money. I don't know if they're testing their code. I don't know what they're doing, but they've hit some libraries. The result has been literally deaths. People have died, delayed care for cancer patients. Government's literally disabled. Products not produced from a manufacturer perspective. And people can't get their money. And I'll give you an example of that. That's when the public gets really mad, is when they can't get their money. Ransoms are now $500K to $10 million. No joke. I've seen them as high as $20 million. And I've known companies that have paid upwards to $12 million. A large healthcare organization, I know, paid $12 million. They negotiated it down from 18. The entire networks are disabled. Let's not do this whole file share thing anymore. That's not valuable. People can restore that. I want every device to be encrypted. Before we encrypt the devices, data is now being exfiltrated off. And there are groups that concentrate on that. So now it's not just the ransomware, it's let's steal the data, encrypt the devices with ransomware. If they don't pay and they restore their systems or whatever they choose to do, we'll just, hold them ransom and we'll publish the information to the internet. Now the compliance issues are real. So in the past, I've worked with firms, lawyers that would say, if we cannot prove that they took data, we're not going to disclose. All the way to, if we can't prove that they didn't take data, we're going to have to disclose. And so, legal opinions are back and forth. Now it's a real issue. If the attackers send you a text message or send you an email with an Excel spreadsheet that has your sensitive information that says, we have this, we're going to publish it, now you've got a disclosure issue. And that's just what's going to force the buying decision. If they don't like the product of the ransomware, then we're going to hold them ransom, and we're going to, extortion from an extortion perspective, we're going to make them pay. So this is 2018. It's a bit dated, but still, it holds true. If you look at the countries that experience the most attacks, if you notice, Russia's really not being hit. Now there's China, which I find interesting. But United States, Canada, yeah, we're definitely being hit. Brazil, I found to be interesting that they're getting hit as much. So this is local stuff. Well, somewhat local, but some news clips. Johnson Cities and Tri-Cities area. It's around Bristol, Tennessee. If you're not familiar with the area, which is not too far from us. Johnson City had to replace 300 desktops after ransomware attack. The ransomware attack, I don't know what the ransom was here, but they spent $215,000 to replace 300 desktops. I don't know why it cost so much money. I guess it's because of the government. If someone here is part of the government, I apologize. But look, City of New Orleans, take months to recover from that. Baltimore, this was a big one. $6 million to pay for a ransomware attack. They considered insurance against the hacks. You know what? Cyber liability is not a bad consideration at this point. We do a lot of tabletop sessions in which, we'll get a group of people together, and I like them because there's much less stress on me, but one of them was ransomware, and the ransom was $2 million. And the chief financial officer looked at me and smiled and said, we'll just pay it. Our cyber liability will cover up to $4 million. Cyber liability will cover a lot of this. Atlanta spent this one just still baffles me. Atlanta spent $2.6 million to recover from a $50,000 ransomware attack. I'm not Warren Buffett. I'm not an MBA, but I think I would have just paid the ransom there. So I cannot pronounce this, but I'm pretty sure. I'm sorry. Someone have a question?
I was about to say, but sorry for jumping in there, but
No.
If they did pay, basically aren't they kind of opening up and saying, well, if we pay this time, we'll pay again? Isn't that the?
I'll tell you what, we've got a slide coming up there, and it's going to be
Okay.
a group discussion.
Sure, my bad.
No, please. No, that's great. Very good point. And I can argue both sides, and I've seen both sides, but we're going to have a group discussion when it comes to that here in a few minutes. Real quick, I cannot pronounce that, but I'm pretty sure it's Russian. So this was a specific type of attack that hit IT solution providers that were providing IT solutions for companies that provided cancer care. Cancer agencies slowed down because eHealth, when we've locked the devices down, people can't get their care. This was actually the last one, ransomware and data breaches linked to uptick in fatal heart attacks. This came from research from University of Vanderbilt. Those guys are pretty smart. What they were able to do is determine that because of outages, not at Vanderbilt specifically, but across the United States, there were deaths that were attributed to that. And I'm not saying like COVID deaths and they're like, well, maybe you had it, maybe you didn't. They were able to directly attribute cyber attacks and ransomware to people having fatal heart attacks because of care, because of not being able to get the routine care. This one was sad. A ransomware attack forces Arkansas company to fire 300 employees days before Christmas. The problem with this was that in the November timeframe is when this company was hit. And they thought that they could recover. They said, well, we're not going to pay the ransom. We're just going to restore everything. They had big parties. They were making a lot of money. They gave bonuses. And then they had to lay off a bunch of people because the company went under. They didn't pay the ransom. They tried to restore from backups, and the data was just flawed. They were making bad decisions based on information that wasn't, valid anymore. The Russian ransomware hits TravelX. So they wanted $3 million. So TravelX is actually, I'm going to talk about it in a minute. It is an exchange platform, currency exchange. This happened, and it was timed so perfectly. It was right around Christmas of last year. And so they timed it to where it was like Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day. People could not get their money. People get really mad when they can get their money. I've got some more details on that in a minute. This one hits really close to home. City of Knoxville, as I mentioned. The city, not the county. So Knoxville is interesting. We have a county government. We have a city government. City of Knoxville is a victim of ransomware. Pay very close attention. So ransomware attacks, cyber criminals locked down the victims' files and demand. We get that. Portions of the city's website were offline Thursday afternoon. Though city officials said their internal assessment shows no financial or personal information had been accessed or compromised. 2 days later, Knoxville, Tennessee, data published online after ransomware attack. They chose not to pay the ransom. The attacker said, all right, fine, we'll just go ahead and publish all of the salary information for every employee, and we also have a lot of other sensitive information. Their initial assessment was wrong. They took the data. Pretty picture. So, yep, even here in Knoxville, it was impacted. And me as a Knoxville citizen, if you think about it, city of Atlanta and New Orleans and Baltimore, if you think about what happens from a municipality perspective, only certain types of traffic accidents were being addressed. Only certain type of fire, it had to be a high severity item. Normal business operations shut down for about 2 or 3 weeks. People had problems paying their property taxes, which is not a problem until you're fined for it. People, I mean, when people wanted to get, titles for their homes and driver's license, the government essentially was limping for 3 weeks. I don't know what ended up happening. They're back up and going now. But I mean, when you see the impact and when municipalities can't do business, that's a huge deal. So this is one that came from a service provider. So InSync experienced a ransom. This is a good way to handle ransomware, believe it or not. So 2019, the company experienced a ransomware attack. We don't know who it was. Things are bad. We're offline. I'm sorry. Being honest with your clients sometimes can pay dividends. So the Maze Group they started the whole trend of let's steal the data before we encrypt it, and then we're going to extort them for more data. So you can still, these are public, I mean, you don't even have to, crank up Tor to get to this. You can go and find, these companies on their data that's out there because they refuse to pay the ransom. So the Maze Group said, all right, you may have restored, replaced your machines. We've got your data. We're just going to put it out there. Construction companies in Georgia and, cleared contractors that work with the federal government, their information, they're like, yeah, we encrypted them. They didn't pay. Here's their data. Here's where we can have that conversation. So, all right, there's 2 options when you get ransomware. I'll pay. So you have to purchase the Bitcoin from a trusted source. If you've not been through that process, if you don't remember anything else, buying Bitcoin is not like going and cashing a check. You have to set up a wallet. It takes days to fund it. It's honor among thieves. They want to know who's going to be in their market, and it's a pain. So what I'm saying is if you were, heaven forbid, but if you were hit with ransomware now and you don't have a Bitcoin wallet set up with any of the exchanges, it could take 2 or 3 days before you can make that transaction work as much as you would like to. So if nothing else, if the cyber liability policies, they can broker that for you, or you can set up your own. If you do get hit and you pay, please change every password because they probably have those. And then, of course, create the backups. Some people say, no, I'll fight it. I'll take my computer to a data forensics expert. I'm a data forensics expert. I cannot decrypt your hard drive. If I had the decryption key to do that, like I said, I would probably be on Norse Lake fishing pretty much every day. You can try different sites for decryptor tools from the backups. So this is the point that we can have the conversation, and I will start. I do think that paying the ransom is a viable option. Is it the best option? I don't know. It depends on the company. If you've not done a tabletop of any sort, do one when it comes to ransomware, because you need to understand the culture of the company that you're working with, and you need to know whether or not they're willing to pay it. The pros on paying the ransom is there's some stats coming up that I question, but I've only known one client that had an issue getting their key. And it's because the attacker group gave them the wrong key. This is business for them. It is in their best interest to give you your product. And that's a little bit for the Maze Group. But if you think about it, if we're at a party and there's 15 of us and we all talk about ransomware parties, and you hear me say, man, Bill's fishing company got hit with ransomware and we paid it. It was a pain, but we got the key and we're back up and running. The flip side of that, if I were to say, we paid the $5,000 or I don't know, $1 million or whatever it is, they didn't give us our key. No one's going to do, the business process fails when that happens. Issues with the FBI, and they will go back and forth. I'm on the board for InfraGard, so I hear both sides of it, is that you could be funding terrorism and doing these things with these attacker groups. And you know what? That's a viable argument. I get it. But you've got a business to run. I did see about 3 weeks ago in one of my InfraGard documents that was sent across is that some of the attacker groups, it could actually be illegal to pay them the ransom, which I don't know that the government needs to be involved with that because we have businesses to run. The flip side is that, if not paying the ransom is you're going to have to do restores, you're going to have an operations issue. I can lobby both sides, but I'm interested in the group since it's a small enough group to have discussion. What are your thoughts on that? If you've been through it, you don't have to disclose one way or another, but do you guys think it's a good idea to pay it or not to pay it?
Kind of like Hamilton, I was not in the room when it happened. So I don't know that, I know from talking to the CIO that one of the reasons they decided not to pay was, and they were advised this, FBI and whoever their security auditors were, that if they paid once, chances are they're going to get ready to have to pay again. And that was a serious fear for them, which is, what's our data? If our data's out there, and they'd punch me in the nose for talking about, because I think they had to come out with compliance and say no data wasn't taken, but let's be honest, a Google search will find that answer. But what is that data, and is it important? And I think that was a decision that they made, and so they said, well, let's not pay.
And that's
weeks. I mean, I'm still, this was months and months ago, and I'm still having to, face auditors on things that happened during that time period. I mean, we had luckily had some data warehouse that had, partial data from most places. So we had to try to, reconstruct full data sets off of partial data. I mean, it's a pain in the ass. Like I don't recommend it, but it wasn't my millions. I also know that they were smart, meaning it's kind of echoes what you said earlier in that they knew it's public, so they knew how much cash on hand there was, or maybe they found it internally. I don't know. And it was right under that threshold. And so they knew they had it. And so it was kind of like, well,
I have a friend. So as far as getting hit again, I don't have data to support one side or the other, but what I can say is if an organization, not you specifically, if I'm hit with ransomware and I don't figure out how it got in, I'm going to get hit again if I pay the ransom or not. So I need to close that hole. So there are companies out, and I may end up covering this, but there are some companies out there that actually negotiate with the ransomware attackers to negotiate the fee down. I don't know. It could be some Russian dude's cousin and they're all in cahoots. I don't know. But one thing, I do have a friend that does that. And I know that, he's not a, Russian cousin. He sent it to me. I was talking to him one day. He sent them an email and said, look, we are a small nonprofit organization in East Tennessee. We can't afford to pay that ransom. I kid you not. They sent him back a screenshot of a spreadsheet that says, yes, you can. Here was your bottom line last year. That's when I say be patient. They know what that client is worth before they set that price, because the prices go from $500,000 to $14 million. They're not guessing. They're actually going to make it a little bit higher and negotiate, be willing to negotiate down so everybody feels good about it. But there are some companies out there that, first off, I'm jumping ahead, but I'm jumping around because it's a smaller group, but there are no companies that can get your data back. There are no cyber companies that can decrypt the information. We can get it off of your devices, figure out how it got in. At the end of the day, you have an operations issue. Either you're down or you're not. And that's what it comes down to.
And sorry if I'm jumping ahead again. So you can tell me to be patient. But my advice was fine. Let's not, if someone wants in your network, they're going to get in your network. There's just so little that you can do. That's my own thought. Next is, well, how fast is the time to recovery? How good are your backups? They of course decrypted our SAN, or encrypted our SANs. Everything, all backups were lost. We had to go to off-site tape, which was a week, 2 weeks old. And depending on the size of your network, you can't back that much data up to tape that easily, that often. So my next thought was, and this is where I'm sort of showing my ass because I have no idea, is, are there, Azure options or some kind of, off-site backups that you can then use to say, well, all right, well, let's just expect for it to happen again if we're not going to sort of get into business of paying for the ransom, and saying, okay, well, let's just see how fast we can recover from them. And if we have sensitive data, we can encrypt that data already ourselves. So that's, they're encrypting encrypted data. So if it gets put out there, we don't have to worry about it as much. Does that make sense?
There's always a cost benefit to, and again, that's why I keep saying that in some instances, ransomware has been a blessing, not in your case. But if someone says, well, and so ransomware is not as, it's just as much of an operations and a business continuity issue as it is a cyber issue. So you can get funding to do that. Can you get your entire, when it comes to offsite backups, and I've got a funny slide coming up on that, but when it comes to offsite backups and those, it's a cost thing. I mean, and you can throw everything into Azure. How long is it going to take you to get it back down? Air-gapped backups are always a good idea. If you were doing disk-to-disk backups on your NAS, yeah, they were in there long enough and they were like, yep, that's what we're looking for. Let's go ahead and encrypt that one while we're here. That's what I'm saying. They spend the time to do that. Backups, as part of your business continuity and your disaster recovery, you have your system classifications and your tiered systems and your A's and B's and C's, and you just have to be sure that the backups for those systems aren't accessible by the attackers. However you do that is fine. But as far as them being able to reach out to Azure and do that, unless you have some type of land-to-land VPN, I don't say them do that. What I'm concerned about with Azure is that the time, or even AWS, the time it's going to take you to get terabytes of data back down to you. So it's an operations issue as much as it is anything else.
Or would Azure or would Amazon say, yeah, but well, that's why you should do business up here. Have your have less in your data center, run your RDP sessions from the cloud, use SQL as a service, or you know what I'm saying.
Yes, but also, that could be a target for the attackers also. They don't always know if it's, and 99.8% of all ransomware is Windows-based. I've not seen any Linux. I've not seen any Mac OS. I'm not saying it's not there, but if, people talk about, and I'm a big Mac advocate. I'm not a fanboy. I'm just an advocate. But, people say, well, why is there not as much malware for Mac as what there is for Windows? It's because it's more secure. I'm like, it's a market thing. If I'm going to develop malware, why would I develop malware for 6% of the market when I can get 89% of the market?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with ransomware.
There's a couple of tools out there. I've been researching backups because we're wanting to change our backups system, and a lot of them are claiming that they're ransomware resistant, meaning that they somehow have like an air gap, like they do a backup, then they do an air gap backup or something. In your personal opinion, is that just blowing smoke, to put it politely? Or are some of these new, Druva and Acronis, are these folks sincere in what they're saying, and are they accurate in what they're saying?
Well, I find it interesting that they use the term resistant. My iPhone is water resistant, but I'm not going to test it.
No, they use the term proof. I'm the one using the term resistant. They don't believe in proof. So that was my choice of wording.
Well, let me draw an analogy with another product on the endpoint. It's a product called SentinelOne. They have a ransomware guarantee that if you get hit with ransomware, they will pay you $1 million if you have their product. I bet
we had Sentinel.
Well, and I'm not throwing shade. I didn't do that. If you read that fine print, I bet. So SentinelOne didn't stop it, and you guys still got hit. I'm sorry.
I'll tell you how. If you want to know, but yeah.
We were hit twice with ransomware in 2016, 7 weeks apart. Amazingly, most of my security budget got approved right after that.
Blank check.
It's amazing. We do social engineering training with a company called Know Before. We do a lot of filtering with Mimecast and Checkpoint and WatchGuard and all sorts of layers and layers of security. And it boiled down to last week, some person on our network,
a user,
actually clicked on a link in an email that was about as bad as you could get. Look in your InMail for this LINKIN promotion that they have. And that person still hasn't spoke to me in the last week, which is fine with me. But it went out to a botnet, and it was easier to take care of. But we didn't pay any ransoms. We had really good backups. I guess it was ransomware 2.0. We did a lot of snapshots of our at a SAN level. So it was right click restore from snapshot, right click restore from snapshot. And the first time we were down about 4 hours. The second time we were down 6.5 hours.
And it's just file share that hit?
Pretty much, yeah.
That's right.
But the thing about us is, and my approach to it is we're wholesale distributors. So if I shut down a server, nobody's going to die. They think they are, but they're really not, I tell you. And so my approach to it has always been aggressive. Let's shut everything down. Let's disconnect switches, whatever. And like I said, if they're already in and they're already looking at stuff and they're already uploading things, it's a moot point. But we try to take a more aggressive approach toward it. And like I said, we have layer upon layer. Are we secure? Not as much as I would like, because we still have to do business. And the tighter restraints that we put on things, the harder it is to do business. A lot of what we do is web-based. A lot of things that we look at are transferred over the web and back. But it's still it's hard to take the human element out of it, and it's hard to balance. For me, it's hard to balance between security and being able to do business back and forth.
I listened to and the ransomware 2.0 sounds like was mainly commodity, still impactful. The 3.0 stuff, it's really targeted. And I was listening to a podcast one day, and they were talking about the misspellings in spam emails and stuff like that. That's intentional. And I was like, that makes no sense. Why would they? First off, I was thinking, can you not hire somebody to proof this before you send it out? It's intentional because they don't want to spend time and effort on people that they feel is a certain level of intelligence. Because after that second email, they're going to be like, no. But if someone will fall for it and look through grammar mistakes, then they feel that I'm not making this up, that their intelligent level is in the ballpark of someone that they want to try to con out of money. So interesting tidbit there. Let's see. We talked about this a little bit, and interrupt me at any time. I enjoy the dialogue more so than I actually do just talking to a Zoom camera. This one I don't agree with. It's here, but they say, a lot of people paid, but they still lost their data. Again, the only times, and we've got a lot of clients, the only times I've known of someone to have an issue with the key was they were given the wrong key or there were technical issues. It was not because the crook was being dishonest, because again, this is a business model for them. If I tell you what, think about it. So I get news blurbs every morning between 9 and 10. I get, top 10 InfoSec news articles a day. And you don't have to respond, but have you ever seen an article? Now, right now, 60% of that is around ransomware. Have you ever seen an article that read the client paid the ransom, but then did not get their key? I've never seen one. So I'm not saying that that's not the case, but if that were to become a trend, this entire multi-billion-dollar, enterprise fails. They're not doing this to be pains in the butt. They're not doing this to steal. They're doing it just to make money. And if there's a reputation that they don't get their product, then the entire business model fails. I always joke about, most of the time we're fighting Russia and China. Russia's after our money and they're getting it hand over fist. Every credit card breach was pretty much Russia. The only thing that they're interested in is money. The only thing China's not interested in our money because we owe them like $13 trillion. They're interested in something more valuable, which is our secret. So if you keep that in mind, it's a little easier to build your defenses. 80% of CISOs say, hey, you know what, we paid it. I'm not suggesting you pay it. All I'm saying is be prepared. If someone were to come to you tomorrow and say, we were hit, we need to pay this ransom, could you do it via Bitcoin? Set up the wallets and figure out what you have available to you. British firms, like I said, they're setting up and getting ready. This is TravelX. So this is how you do not deal with ransomware. Our online foreign currency purchasing service is temporarily unavailable due to planned maintenance. No one plans for ransomware. They're lying to you. And everyone knew what was going on. This is just a terrible way to handle it. Tell your clients. This is actually an online software as a service accounting software platform. They pretty much just stopped and said, yeah, we're tired of these pesky clients. Let's just go ahead and shut our Twitter account. Not a good sign. When it comes to municipality, and I'm going to talk about controls in a minute where you can get at least a little bit of value instead of just me soapboxing, but the municipalities, I'm convinced that the majority of those had RDP, internet facing, without multi-factor. Because I don't know if you realize or not, but even today, some of our larger clients, we still find remote desktop. And so you can see the funny analogy there. Ransomware deployment protocol, not remote desktop. You can grind away to get the administrator username and password all day long. It will not lock the account. You can just grind and grind and grind and grind until you get it. And you know what? Most companies that have that set up, guess where you're going to land once you finally get that admin password? Right in the middle of the data center. That's where a lot of the ransomware comes from. And I'm convinced that probably 50% of the municipalities, out of convenience, have RDP open to the internet, and that's how they get hit. This is that same Russian one, but this was actually pretty interesting. They found a 0-day in the Citrix Net, no, was it Citrix? Yeah, Citrix NetScaler, that they could bypass multi-factor. So they could get username and password from phishing, and then even though multi-factor was enabled on the NetScaler or whatever Citrix calls it now, they could still bypass that and get in. I already talked about it, that attack vector. Here were the protections for 2.0. Although this is 2.0, please still consider these. If nothing else, block uncategorized run on websites. If you have Blue Code or website or whatever you have that's doing content filtering, if you will block unknown, uncategorized, or newly registered domains, you will knock down 98% of any malware that comes into your environment. Guaranteed. Because malware does not exist on legitimate websites. It exists on other websites that are popped, command and control. You know, I'm right near Oak Ridge, worked so many compromises when it came to the PLA or China and clear contractors. The C2, any case study you read, the C2 was communicating with an unknown or uncategorized website. They just stood it up just for the attack purposes. The same thing with ransomware. That long website that I showed you in that screenshot, that's not legitimate. They have to move it from website to website to website to where it doesn't get knocked down like a gnat. So if you block the uncategorized, unknown, or newly registered domains, you are going to knock out the majority of the malware that's getting in your environment when your users are still on the reservation. The only organizations that sometimes have a problem with this, every now and then healthcare may, because they may be communicating with sites that aren't there. You can whitelist them. It could be a pain. You can set it up in login mode just to see what would happen, but you will remove a lot of malware just for that. Disable Office macros. There is absolutely no reason anyone needs to be enabling active content. Well, we're an accounting firm. We still have to do that. Okay, fine. And you can digitally sign those documents. You can turn it off across the board in Active Directory. You can enable it by default for only specific users, and you can actually have the 2 people in the world that still need to enable macros. You can actually digitally sign those with a certificate to where you trust them. Patch your systems, obviously. Binaries running from temp folders. This was huge because that's where the ransomware hit. Do not allow Tor traffic. This is 2020. Whitelisting, if possible. Of course, that's going to knock it down because if you're only allowing certain binaries, then that's malware can't run or ransomware can't run. Backups, obviously, there is no silver bullet. And the reason I say this is because, we talked about backups in which the vendor says it's guaranteed. And then SentinelOne, it says there is no silver bullet. You just have to do the best that you can. This is the slide I was talking about. I follow this dude on Twitter, and he is a jerk. I don't know who it is personally, but what about your backups? The ransomware encrypted those 2. Okay, not ideal, but this is what your offline backups are for. We don't have offline backups. Pause. Well, the good news is 250 Bitcoin is worth $37,000 less now than it was 45 seconds ago. All right, so here are the protections today. I think Silence is a great product. I think a lot of the next-gen AV stuff is really good. It's not going to stop everything. Penetration tests, in my opinion, are more important now than they were with Ransomware 2.0 because the way that they're getting in is phishing. The same way that the PLA in China and APT or whatever we want to call them, the persistence groups, they get in through phishing or something else, and that's how they spend so much time there. Penetration tests will help you figure that out. Someone brought up No before a little bit earlier. As consultants, we do not suggest or promote any product. except for KnowBe4. I think KnowBe4 is phenomenal. I've got a really good friend that works for FishMe, and he'll even admit that KnowBe4 is eating their lunch. Well, it's FishMe, it's Cofense now. Multi-factor authentication. The attackers are not doing drive-bys anymore. They're on your network and in your network. Multi-factor, it's not a silver bullet, it's bronze. And I want to be clear with that. If you have multi-factor, kind of soapbox in here, if you can, turn off push notifications. Our pen testers, when they find out that organization has push notifications, they'll send the emails, they get the credentials, they wait till 3 o'clock in the morning, they log in 5 times. After the 4th time, the person rolls over and says, fine, go ahead and get in. Standard cyber hygiene, pen test patching, safe backups we talked about. Look at your cyber liability coverage, see what it would cover. Cyber liability insurance is not the replacement for an information security program, not at all. But you can only reduce your risk so far. Cyber liability gives you the capability of transferring a little bit of that risk to someone else. Do your tabletop exercises. Host it internally, find a third party, whatever you want to do, but run through a ransomware because you want to know how your organization is going to respond before you have to respond. And the opportunity being a motivational speaker, of getting ransomware is kind of high, unfortunately. Just understand what you may be up against. That's all that I have, and I have no idea if I'm over or not. If I am, I'm sorry. I am. I apologize. But I'll stay here and talk as long as you gentlemen would like to.
Yeah, and thanks, Bill. That was very enlightening, and also appreciate the guys that chipped in the conversation as well. So I can leave this conference open. This is not my random one. So if you guys want to stay and chat with Bill, as long as Bill has the time, you guys are welcome to. I have to jump off here in just a second, but feel free to stay and talk. We appreciate you taking the time to chat. I know Andrew and you guys stay pretty busy, especially considering the current environment. So we're grateful for you taking the time to join us. Would love to have you back, in 6 to 9 months when we have probably ransomware 4.0.
Oh gosh, I hope not. I hope it just stays where it is. We can get our arms around this one.
Well, very good. But yeah, so you guys feel free to hang out and chat. I'm going to end the recording, and you guys can stay and talk and have any questions you have for Bill. So you guys feel free to hang out as long as you want. But I appreciate everybody joining. You guys have a good rest of the day.
You too, man. Thank you.
All right, take care.